Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 9 of an ongoing series focused on configuration profiles in Microsoft Intune, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Today's session will focus on the concept of shared devices or implementing and discussing the options related to shared devices. Now, as we approach this topic, we did a previous topic where I talked about kiosk mode as it applies to Windows, as it applies to iOS and Android. So there is a kiosk mode option as well. But there is, in this session, we'll talk about shared device, implementing shared device. They have a lot of similarities in some cases, but differences as well. So if you think of a kiosk device, it would be a device that is used by the public, is used by folks that are not associated with your organization, etc. Right? And generally, a shared device, you think of situations where a device is shared between employees of an organization, maybe a call center, maybe a retail scenario, that kind of thing. Certainly not limited to that. You could kind of mix the two in concept depending on what you want to do, right? But that's why these are different topics and why there's different options for each one. So we're going to focus on shared devices. There are, as I said, places where we're going to see some similarities, especially on Android. But we'll talk about that when we get there, and we'll go forward. So our agenda for this session, like always, what are shared devices? Why do we care? We'll talk about the scenarios that we're going to investigate. Then we'll look at each individual scenario, talk about options, requirements, etc., show it to you in action, and then we will be done. So, what are shared devices? And this, again, applies whether it's Windows, whether it's iOS, whether it's Android. Basically, these are devices that are optimized for those shared usage scenarios, those scenarios where you might have a device that's shared between workers, maybe a 24 by 7 rotation in a work call center, or those retail organizations, etc. It could be point of sales, could be a touchdown space in offices where employees come and go, depending on the day and who reserves what, and so on. There are specific device configurations as well. If you are going to use a device in a shared scenario, for example, in some cases, the apps that are being used need to be engineered to support that shared scenario. So there's certainly a scenario where that is true for Apple iOS. There's also a scenario where that's true for Android, right? And so again, generically talking about things right now. And then another thing about specific device configuration, when we build this for the shared scenario, one of the things that we will optimize for is device security. And so device security, meaning just from the start, since this is a shared device, certain things will be limited, right? You'll really see that on, well, you'll see it across, right? But on Windows, you'll see that. On iOS, in the shared iPad scenario coming up, you'll see that, right? And then in addition to just the default changes that we make to the OS for that shared device scenario specifically, you can implement other things alongside, like with device restrictions and so on, to help give you what you need for those shared devices. So why do we care about shared devices? Well, in those shared scenarios, we know there's going to be multiple users on the device. And so we want to use this scenario to protect the device, protect corporate information on the device, enable usage scenarios as needed for sure, but also enable those protections, maybe even perhaps more so on these shared devices, since it isn't just a single user on it. And in some cases, you might not know who the user is going to be day to day, right? Now, optimize the experience. So while you are using the shared device scenario, you don't want the user experience to be negatively impacted. So you do want to provide that user experience that's very useful. But the other benefit is that it minimizes the management requirements, because this is how the devices kind of are born, if you will, from the very beginning. Here you can optimize your device performance because you are eliminating certain things and you're kind of anticipating what the workloads on these devices might be. You can protect your corporate device itself and data that's on it, protects your network access as well, and really engineered to avoid unintended use. We could probably add a few more things in there as well. So, what are the scenarios we're going to talk about? Well, pretty simply, we're going to show you this concept on Windows devices. We're also going to show it on iOS, iPad, and then we will end with Android. And we'll demo each one of them. Some more so than others, right? So let's start with Windows. So specifically on Windows now, what are the options, right? So in Windows, again, specifically, we have shared PC settings. And so this is something that you can exactly directly implement from Intune to implement shared PC. In addition to that, you can build other options through device configuration, such as device restrictions, to make the device be just as you would like it to be. Right? I've done that in the demo. You can add Windows Defender application control as another layer of protection, so only approved apps are allowed to run on the device. And there's so much more we could talk about. Right? Just know that it's not generally shared PC only, it's shared PC plus what you need in your environment to deliver the configuration that you need for these devices. So requirements, put simply, you need Windows 10, 1607 or better, Windows 11 for sure, these versions of Windows, and then Intune, kind of goes without saying because we're talking about Intune, that you can then deliver these device configurations. So how does this work at the end of the day? So with shared PC in Windows, we have the single logged on user scenario. Only one user can be signed in at a time so that we can control the scenario. Locked locked login screen. So when the PC is locked, the currently signed in user can always be signed out. But uh, that because you can only have one signed in user, if someone else needs to sign in, then you can kick the person in there out and go ahead and sign in, right, if you need to. These devices will need to be either hybrid Azure AD or Azure AD joined. And then user access uh, will be available to any user that's part of the directory Azure AD hybrid, so they would be on-prem AD members, and the device would be there and replicated to Azure AD. If it's pure Azure AD, then the user would be in pure Azure AD. If you are using Azure AD Premium, then any domain user can also be configured to sign in with administrative rights as needed. And then also, in addition to user access, known user access, you can choose optionally to enable guest account access. Don't need to do that, don't have to do that. But if you do, what this will end up doing is creating a new local account each time you're signed in as a guest. So nothing is carried forward from one session to another, at all. And then finally, KIOSK. So the Windows client can be configured to have a KIOSK option on the sign-in screen if you would like. It does not require any user credentials or authentication, and creates a new local account every time it's used, right? So again, there's that decision point. Do you want a KIOSK experience? Do you want a shared PC experience? What are you actually trying to accomplish? And there are advantages of KIOSK, of shared PC, depending on that scenario, right? Okay, so in terms of configuring, so let's pull in Intune. All right, so grabbing the Intune portal, there we go. Didn't grab it for a minute. All right, so to get to the options, I'm going to go to Devices, and then I'm going to focus on Windows devices. So I just keep the options limited there. And I'm going to go to Configuration Profile. So you see that I have a few things already here, but I'm going to pretend that I don't, and I'm going to go look at what I can choose. So any platform you want, really Windows 10 and later, sorry, any platform Windows 10 and later, not this one. And then go choose, I'm going to choose out of templates and go look at my options. If I scroll down, I see, in fact, shared multi-user device. Now, don't let that confuse you, right? Shared multi-user device is exactly what it says. It's a device that's intended to be used by multiple users, but not at the same time, right? As I mentioned in the requirements, this is for one, the device can support one logon session at a time, but you can have multiple users that use the device. And contrast that up here. I mentioned there's a kiosk mode setting we talked about in a different session. That's up here, right? So if I want to go ahead and set up my shared multi-user device, this is what I would choose, and go forward from there, right? So I'm going to go on forward and click create. And then here are my options. I would just walk through it like normal, and we will see options specific to shared multi-user device mode. So first one is, hey, do I want to enable shared PC mode? If it's not enabled, then none of the rest of this matters. So if I turn it on, then the rest of that matters, and I get to make choices such as, what do I want to do for guest account? Do I want to allow just the guest account? Do I want to allow just the domain account, or do I want to allow both? Right? What do I want to do in terms of local storage? Do I want to enable access to it? Do I not? Do I want to enable access to power policies? Do I not? And so on. So all of these are really applied specifically to that shared PC scenario. So I have my device already, or my policies already configured, my policies are already put out there. And so I will just exit out of this at this point and shift over to, instead of showing you how to configure it anymore, I will show it to you. I will show it to you in action. 1 second. Right. And so again, those are just the shared PC devices configurations themselves, right? You're going to surround the shared PC configurations if you want with some additional things, and I will show that to you as well. Right. Now, one little note. I'm demonstrating this using virtual machines. And so this is just a reminder that I put in the notes to myself because I always mess it up. If I'm using virtual machines to illustrate this, I must use them in a non-enhanced configuration mode. Otherwise, I won't see some of the things that I want to see. So whenever I bring in the VM in a minute and show this to you, I need to make sure and mention it to myself that I use it in non-enhanced configuration mode. Okay, so let's look at this in action. So the first thing I want to do is show you the different things that I've actually configured on this, and I will start with my shared device just to show you what's out there. Right, so first of all, it's deployed, it's been successful. This is one of the ways that you would look. I could view a report and see that as well, but here I care mainly about the settings that I've deployed. So here's the different settings that I've got configured as part of this, right? So I'm enabling it. I'm allowing guest access, right? Account management is enabled. My account deletion will happen immediately after log out. Other things, I'm not allowing access to local storage. I'm not allowing access to power policies if my device is idle for 60 seconds, which we will do that. It'll be maybe a little bit painful to just sit for a minute and watch, but if we leave the device idle for 60 seconds, it will reset. Now, this is one of those things that whenever I was testing it, I was using the enhanced mode for my VM, and it never reset, and it frustrated me. Then I finally realized, oh wait, I need to not be in enhanced mode in order for this to work. And then other options, right? Now I have a few other things configured as well. So let's go back and look. I've got some ADMX restrictions out there that have been deployed, and so those also have been deployed successfully. As you will see, succeeded here. And then if I look at the properties of this device, of this configuration, then I would go down and see the configuration settings. There's a bunch of them, so just looking at these, do not send additional data. I turn that on. Prevent changing proxy settings. That's the one I'll show you in the demo. That's disabled through Internet Explorer. And then finally, I have some additional device restrictions on here that we can look at. That's going to be right here. And those, as I look here again, to successful, let's scroll down, let's see what device restrictions I have in place. So here, I've got these. So basically control panel and settings. What do I want to do there? Right, I'm blocking certain things. Power and sleep, accounts is blocked, updating, gaming, a whole list. You'll see this whenever I get into the demo. I won't go into every single one. the start screen, I'm blocking the ability to shut it down. I'm blocking the power button, lock screen experience, right? Different things. So definitely have these out there. Definitely have these configured. And so with that, let me go pull in my Windows device and we will take a look. Okay, so here's my virtual machine. It is not in an enhanced mode session. Let's just show you that, right? You can tell by the way the screen is drawn on my screen, however, but it's not in enhanced mode, so that's good, right? And so if I click on this, I have a couple of options. I can sign in as my user. Let's see here. Let's see. Okay, apologies. I thoroughly confused myself for a minute um, because I saw options that I did not expect to see. And so I realized that I was just being an idiot, which happens all the time, and I pulled in the wrong virtual machine. So, with that said, let's pull in the right one and we will see a bit of a different experience, right? So, here is my non enhanced session that I'm looking at. And so I have the option to log in as a user. I also have the option to log in as a guest. So if I choose guest, I'm just going to sign in, and the system is going to recognize that. It's just going to sign in. There's no credentials needed at all. Um, and then when we get in, it's going to look very much like a Windows session, but you're going to see that certain things are not available to me, right? And so as soon as we get in, this takes a minute for whatever reason. Not sure, but probably just my lab and such. But we'll let this thing get in here, and then we will take a look at Windows. I'll pause real quick. All right, so Windows Desktop just came up, so looks very much like Windows. I have the start button, all the things that I would care about. Right? I have the ability to right click, but I have no ability to shut down. I can restart, but I can't shut down. I can sign out. Just limitations that I put on there. So right now, before I sign in as a real account, I'm just going to be hands off for 60 seconds. I'm not going to make you sit the entire 60 seconds. I'm going to pause real quick and I will come back whenever things start to happen. Okay, so the screen just went dark, so I'm going to go over here and it should let me minimize this. There. So I'm back to my sign-in screen, right? So that was really exciting. Good for you guys because you didn't have to wait the whole 60 seconds. 60 seconds goes a lot slower whenever you're actually waiting on it. So the next thing I want to do is just log in with a user account. So I'm going to sign out of this account and then log in with my user account. Now that I look at this, maybe it didn't go all the way to recycle. Maybe it timed out. Don't know, but you get the effect. All right, so I'm going to sign out here, and then I'm going to sign in with a real user account on this device. Okay, so that's done. So now let me just sign in with a Azure AD account here. I really need to shorten this login, but I never do. So let's go ahead and do this. In theory, this should log in, and now I should get a session just as my user account. There I come, right? And it'll look the same as what I just had, but then we'll go explore a little bit and see some of those limitations that I've put on, which frankly would be on the guest account too, but no need to show it twice, right? So as soon as this gets up and running and we're at the desktop, then we will continue. Okay, so we are at the desktop, and so just kind of like before, if I right click, go to shutdown, sign in, I have those same options. If I want to go to not control panel, settings, then I will have the options limited, as you will see. All right, come on, open. And let's see, I know I also set up proxy in Internet Explorer, so we'll go look at that. Internet Explorer. So I want Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer. Okay, thank you. That's what I want. Okay, so I'll open that too. But you see already in the settings app that certain things are not as you would normally expect them on a full PC. You don't have accounts, you don't have updates, you don't have certain other things, right? If I go into system, then certain things would be there, certain things would be restricted. and so forth. So I'm not going to go into every single one of them, but you get the idea. And then finally, if I go into Internet Explorer and want to try to go set the proxy options from here, then the way I've always done that is Internet Options, and then go into, as soon as this comes up, come on, you can do it. Wait for a second. And there it is. And then go to connections, and then go to LAN settings. I have this that I can see, but I can't do anything with it because I have the restrictions in place, right? So not exciting, right? Perhaps to see as a demo, but hopefully exciting in concept for what you can do. Go away, IE. What you can do with shared PCs, some of the ways that you could apply it to your business needs, and so forth, right? So let's just get rid of this, and we will move on. So that's Windows, right? That's Windows. Not hard to conceptualize. Yeah, certainly it would take some planning and testing and so forth to get it exactly where you want it to be, but pretty easy conceptually to understand, right? Let's switch over to iOS and iPadOS, right? And so I put shared device in parentheses because there are two scenarios. Shared devices is what we will show. It is the preferred route, and it only applies to iPadOS. But let's get into it. So, in terms of options, there are two. One is the shared iPad. What did I say? Did I say shared device? I meant to say shared iPad. Either way, right? You have it here. So you have the shared iPad, and you also have something called shared device mode. So the shared iPad is the preferred option. It's generally thought that you would more likely share an iPad than you would share an iPhone. Not a hard and fast rule, for sure, but generally speaking, if you walk into a retail scenario or other scenarios, you will likely more often see. I don't recall ever seeing a shared iPhone. I've very frequently seen a shared iPad, right? But if you need to have a shared iPhone, that's what you would do in shared device mode. Shared device mode also could apply to iPad. So we will talk about both. I will show you shared iPad, and then we will just talk about shared device mode, since it is really not our preferred option. And so, kind of to illustrate this, here's shared iPad versus shared device mode requirements and recommendations. So again, shared iPad is the preferred. So in terms of supported device type for shared iPad, kind of makes sense that only iPads would apply. For shared device mode, it could be iPhone, iPad, iPod, if you have a need for that for some reason. In terms of device requirements, you do need iPadOS 13.4 or later. In fact, in order to set this up, I have some older iPads that I use for demo that were not capable of moving forward to iPadOS 13.4. I had to go out and get an iPad updated iPad that was capable of moving forward. Probably needed to do that anyway, just to have it in my repertoire, so to speak, of devices. Also need 32 gig of storage or better. For shared device mode, you can use iOS, iPadOS, as long as it's 13 or better, you're good, right? So generally your iPhones, my iPhone, I'm on the latest, which I think is it 15 now? I can't remember, 15.4. It's no problem. It's an older iPhone as well, but it's able to receive that without a problem. So Azure AD Federation, right? Being able to take your own Azure AD tenant and federate it with Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager is going to be important for shared iPad. It is not required for shared device mode, but for shared iPad, absolutely is. It's required. So this enables users to sign into the Azure AD. Sign into your shared iPad using Azure AD credentials. So this one goes hand in hand with the next one, Managed Apple ID. So the Managed Apple ID also is only required with shared iPad, not required for the shared device mode. So here's the real kind of junction between the two. So with shared iPad, Apple requires that you have an account registered with them That's why it's called a managed account that is used to sign in with these shared iPads. When I first looked at the shared iPad and I saw managed Apple ID, it didn't really click with me. I was just thinking a managed ID up in Azure AD, blah blah blah. No, that's not it, right? It has to be a device registered with Apple in either Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager. It also does need for your Azure AD tenant to be federated so that you can have synchronization between the two, and so you can have that account managed in Azure AD, and it kind of just takes care of itself, right? But do they have to be in both places? Yeah, they do, right? And so um, just be aware of that. And I must have I got to a screen which I will show you in a minute on my shared iPad where it would ask for a user account and then it would ask for a passcode. And I had no idea what it was asking for. Passcode I tend to think of as a numeric entry, but in this case it wasn't. It was the password of that managed ID. So once I put that password in, all was good, and I was able to work without an issue. Right? Okay, it's recommended. So up here, the shared iPad is the recommended shared device solution for M365 on iPadOS. And if you do have like an iPhone or something that you need to share between folks, then yeah, we do have that scenario covered with shared device mode, which we'll talk about more in a moment. And so for other requirements, device provisioning, shared iPad is going to be provisioned at enrollment through ADE, and it must be configured without user affinity. So no specific user tied to the device. Kind of makes sense, right? This is a shared iPad. It's not being given to a specific user, and so it would make sense that it not require user affinity. So that is the requirement, to not have user affinity configured. For shared device mode, this is enabled on devices when they're enrolled with ADE as well without user affinity. So shared device mode, shared iPad, both happen at initial enrollment. Temporary sessions, do you allow them, right? So on shared iPad, that is allowed by default. So this would be like a guest account, kind of thing. You don't have to allow that. You could turn it off, but it is doable. Shared device mode doesn't really apply. Supported app types. So this would be device assigned required apps and policies. Any user will get these when they sign into the device. So you can't target devices. You see that in a minute, to the device as optional because there's no user interface to be able to go retrieve those devices, right? You have to deploy all the apps as required apps. And then on the shared device, any device assigned required apps and policies would be applied as well. So unsupported scenario, conditional access on both are unsupported. So granting conditional access conditions for a device that requires an approved client app, required app protection policy, or required per app terms and conditions to be marked as compliant, that is going to be a problem. So conditional access, not at all supported. App protection policies are also not supported for the device. Oh, also on conditional access, any conditions that use filters for the device, right? So app protection policy is not supported the company portal, not supported because these are devices enrolled without user affinity. Available apps also not supported because there is no user, no way to get user specific interaction to install those available apps on the shared device mode. You must have apps that support shared device mode. So the apps themselves have to be written to support shared device mode. So any apps not supporting shared device mode are unsupported, and any user assigned policies and apps again are unsupported. There is no user on the device, right? And I bet user assigned apps and policies over here wouldn't really be supported either because there is no user. Right? Okay. So recommendations. So I'm not going to go through each one of these. There are recommended settings that you consider when configuring these settings. So I mentioned you configure the shared iPad mode or the shared device mode, whatever it is, the shared configuration, but then you augment around that with additional configurations. So these are some of those configurations, some of the device feature things that are suggested. This defines whether it can be applied to the device or the user, or both, right? Here's the device restrictions that we would suggest that you take a look at, and so forth. Again, not going to go through each one of these, just calling these out from our documentation. So how does this actually work? Not a lot of things that I'm going to put in here, just to say that what this does provide is, like on the Windows side, it provides a limited focused user experience just to give the user what they need to get their job done with that device, without all the other controls that might come in whenever a user owns a given device, right? Kind of to that end, whenever I was looking at this, I was wondering, is there a way to get this device to snap into an administrative mode? So whenever I get onto the device, you're going to see that this device is uh, it doesn't have the options that you would have if you had your own personal iPad device, like the ability to reset and things of that nature, right? And so I wondered, is there a way to get into the device and in kind of an admin type mode to be able to reset it? And the answer is no, there's not. Right? Once you configure it for shared, it is going to be shared. It's going to act like a shared device. So one question you might have then is, well, what if I need to get it out of shared device mode? Well, that's going to require a device reset. Since you can't reset the device um, through the device itself, then you can always trigger that through Intune. Since this is managed by Intune, you can trigger the device reset through Intune without a problem, right? Okay, so let's get into configuring this thing, how it looks. I'm going to pull back in the Intune portal, and we will move over to iOS right now. So for iOS, for shared iPad, for shared device mode, both of these are implemented through enrollment, right? So let's go back home and let's go to devices, and then let's go to iOS, iPadOS, and then let's go to device enrollment, right? And let's look at the enrollment process that will get us into shared device mode. So I'm going to look at enrollment program tokens, and then if I look, well, sorry, if I scroll down first and find the entry. Here's my entry for um, the shared device mode, and I'm going to look at my profile. So my one profile that I have created here is going to be set up for shared device mode. Let's look at the properties of it, and we will see what we see. All right. So all right. So let's drill into it. I'm just going to edit my management settings here, and if I scroll down, I'm going to see first that I'm enrolling the device without user affinity, right? Supervised, yes, and then scroll down that shared iPad, yes or no, right? And so this is yes, and then other things that might matter as you go along. Required shared iPad temporary session not configured, yes, whatever you want, and some various other things, right? Device name, whatever you want to do. So it's really, really, really pretty simple to snap this into shared device or shared iPad mode at enrollment. So that's shared iPad. So shared device mode. How do we configure this? Well, so this is one that I'll show you a little bit. I'm not going to walk through it in great detail because again, this is not the common scenario. It's not the preferred scenario, right? But I'll still go through that. So basically, what shared device mode requires is that you have, first of all, sorry, let me get this out of the way for a second. That first of all, you have apps that are created to work in shared device mode, right? It is not something that a standard app is going to be able to do. You have to specifically engineer the app to do it. Another thing you need to do is create a configuration to deploy the Microsoft Enterprise Single Sign-On app, and that is Microsoft Authenticator. So you would deploy Authenticator just like you would deploy any other app to the device, right? It needs that to enable shared device mode. And then finally, you're going to go enable the shared device mode. But to do that, you need to have the single sign-on extension enabled so that you can go create that. So let me show you what that looks like. And that's really probably the extent of what I'm going to do. Right, so let's go back, portal menu, let's go home, let's go to all devices, and then we will go to iOS and iPadOS devices, and then configuration profiles. And so here you see that I have shared device mode and then shared iPadOS additional device restrictions. So let me just start here, right? So if I go look at, and I don't have this deployed, right? I'm not going to demonstrate this, but, oops, sorry, scroll down here. If I show you what I have, basically a few different configurations. I've got the single sign-on app kind of here. It's not configured. I don't have anything selected for my cert, whatever, but the key things that you care about are in the single sign-on app extension. And so there's a bunch of different things. In fact, I'm going to show you this just to show you the different configurations. The single sign-on app extension type is Azure AD. That's where you have the Microsoft Authenticator app tie-in, and you want to enable shared device mode. Yes. Right now, the documentation on this is really, it's not, I wouldn't say it's confusing, but there's a lot that goes into this. And so let me show you under shared device mode. Let me create a new profile and look real quick. Okay, so this is going to be under device features. And so if I go grab that, give it a dummy name because I don't care, I'm not saving this, and then go create, next. Right, my configuration settings, so you see single sign-on here, that's really not where I want to go. I want to go to single sign-on app extension. And so under here, I've got a number of options. Single sign-on app extension type. What do I want? Well, there's a number of options here. And so we're going to choose Azure AD because I know that's what needs to be there. So Azure AD, okay? And then enable shared device mode. This is the only place that you're going to see shared device mode. So our documentation, let me get another one. Our documentation actually gives you, there's to me a conflict in our documentation. I've actually reported this forward where we will talk about configuring shared device mode, but choosing a different option here. Well, there's no other option that actually exposes shared device mode. If I can actually get it to click into these, there's no other option that actually exposes shared device mode. So it has to be maybe Kerberos. Check that one out. Yeah. So again, none of these will support shared device mode at all, except for that one up here, Azure AD, and we have to have that in order to work with the Authenticator app, right? So this is what you need. You need Azure AD and configure shared device mode to yes, and then you deploy it. There can be some other things if you want, app bundle IDs. That again, you need an app that is engineered for shared device mode, and you can configure it further there. But this is how you would turn that on, and that's what I actually have configured. Again, not deploying it, not going to carry this any further to look at, but wanted to at least show you that. Right. Now, in terms of actually seeing this work, let's look at shared iPad. So here's pulling in a picture of my iPad. So this is kind of odd because I'm in the, I'm going to click guest access. I'm going to click this and just go ahead and scroll up so it'll let me in. Right, getting ready. So to show you this, it's in guest mode. So I can, once I'm in guest mode, I can actually set things up and join Wi-Fi and do all of that, and then share my screen directly on the iPad. But because I'm not doing that, I can't really share the screen the whole time. So I'm having to use another device to take a picture of it. So apologies for any bumps. But as you see, I'm in shared mode, and then I can go in and I can press on settings, and that's about all I'm going to do, right? And you can see that the device doesn't have the typical setting screen that you would expect. So now, pardon me for a minute, I'm going to power it off and power it on and hit the X over here to kind of get back to the main X over here. Sorry, to get back to the main screen, log out. This is kind of weird going between the two, right? And so it says goodbye, and it'll come back to my shared account. So this SR is one that was logged in recently. And so I'm going to just pause the recording for a minute and log in and be back. So I did that now, and I'm logged in as a known user, right? And I can look at the settings app, and it's going to have the same kind of options here, right, that I did with the guest account. If I can get it tapped, come on, there it is, right? And so not a whole lot to show. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting the iPad, and that's really it, right? The other thing that I mentioned, and I just want to show you really quick. So not really exciting to see it on the screen, but I wanted to at least show you that it's there, that you can log in as guest, that you can log in as a regular account. So wanted to make sure I showed you that. And then also one other thing that I just want to show you to reinforce is I mentioned that you need to have a managed Apple ID, and you do. And so you also need to have your configuration, your Azure Active Directory federated with Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager so that you have this account that you can control on the Azure AD side and so forth. And so I do, just to look at my account, just to show it to you. Again, not real exciting, but just to show you. I have an account that's called Shared iPad, and there it is. And so this is the account that I logged into with the iPad, and that is the one that's federated with Apple, and that is the one that has the request for the passcode whenever you sign into the shared iPad, and that's what confused me for a while. I was thinking a numeric sequence, but it's really just the password that you've assigned to that account in Apple Business Manager and synchronized with Azure Active Directory, right? Okay, so that's done, right? So pretty easy. I mentioned that I'm not going to demonstrate shared device because it is a corner scenario, and I don't have any shared device apps enabled apps anyway, so that would kind of be a hindrance as far as that goes, right? Okay, so now Android. So Android also is an interesting story, right? Because we talked about Android in kiosk mode. In fact, I think I left this as kiosk mode for the requirement screen. That's interesting. Sorry about that. That's supposed to say shared device mode. But these requirements are for shared devices for Android. And you need Android 6 or better. You do need the Microsoft Authenticator app. You need apps that are written to respect shared device mode, just like you do for one of the scenarios for Apple. Then you need something called Google Mobile Services. Now, one thing in the testing I've done so far, and admittedly, I haven't tested all three scenarios, two of the three, right? But it seems like to me Google Mobile Services really is only needed for one of the three scenarios I'll talk to you about in a minute. Again, I haven't tested that yet, um, but just because I don't have enough Android devices. But it just doesn't seem like GMS is needed for all three. Anyway, you need your device enrolled as a corporate-owned dedicated device. Now, little asterisks here. So my device is enrolled as a corporate-owned dedicated device because that's what I know we require in certain scenarios. But there are some other options that make it appear as if you don't need to be specifically corporate-owned dedicated device. There's corporate-owned other type options as well. There's even BYOD. So I'll explain what I mean as I go through. I know that corporate-owned dedicated device is required for one of the three scenarios. So we'll show you that in a minute. And then managed home screen. Again, an asterisk here. So we talked about managed home screen whenever we talked about kiosk mode, right? Well, when we talk about shared device mode, we also talk about the option to use managed home screen. But based on what I've tested and what I've read so far, it's not really a required scenario, but it makes a lot of sense for a shared devices type scenario, right? So just keep in mind that managed home screen could well be beneficial to you, if not a strict requirement, in all scenarios. Now, so let's get in here and actually look at what it looks like to configure this. So there's three actual ways to go about configuring this. The first is through the Microsoft Authenticator app and configuring things manually. That's what I've actually done for the demo. So basically, you would configure the Microsoft Authenticator app. It's going to be there for your Android enrollment anyway, because it needs to be there as part of an Android enrollment. And so you can configure it manually by simply going into the section in the Authenticator app and configure it, right? So yeah, if it's not there, you want to make sure it's deployed. Should be there as part of enrolling the device, right? In many cases, most cases, all cases that I know of. But as an extra level, you can deploy it if you want to, and so forth, and then go through and manually configure the app, right? Um, there's documentation on how to do that. I'll show that to you, I think, in a minute, right? And then the other way is to use an app. So that's manual. I've done manual. I'm going to show you manual, what that looks like here in just a moment. The other way is to use an app configuration. So let me go show you that, right? So if I go to apps and then I look at app configuration down here, so scroll down app configuration policies and look at Android app config. This is the one I used as, I set up as a demo for how to snap an Android device into shared device mode. And so simply here, if I look at properties, there's an option in properties. In fact, I'll show it to you here. Then I'm going to go configure it separately. Where I have shared devices mode as an option to enable as true for my device. And so using the app configuration is a way to do it in bulk. So I kind of think of manual as that way for testing, limited use case, limited users, might just be easier to do it that way. For a number of devices, for generalized control through Intune, the app configuration profile might be interesting. Let me show this to you real quick. So whenever I go and I'm configuring the app configuration, I'm going to choose Authenticator as my option. So it's going to ask me what platform. So it's going to be Android Enterprise. Then what profile type. Is it going to be for fully managed, dedicated, and corporate-owned work profile only? So I know it's there. That's what I just showed you is a profile configured so. But when I mentioned a minute ago that it's not necessarily strictly just the corporate owned work profile because there's places where it shows you other options too, like fully managed, dedicated, whatever, right? The option to go to shared is available for all of them, but it's also available for personal. So let me here through this mechanism. So let me show you this authenticator there. Hit OK. All right, let's continue the configuration. So now I'm going to be given an option. What do I want to do? Do I want to add different permissions? No, that's not what I care about. But I do care about configuration settings. So I'm going to use the configuration assignment, and I'm going to add. And the very first configuration key I see is shared device. So I've not tested it on a personal owned device, but man, the implications here suggest that it would work. Right? Now, again, I know it works on the corporate owned because I've done that, but it just raises the question mark in my mind, since I do see it on the list for personally owned, if in fact it would work there as well. Right? So enough said about that. And then the third way that I would go through configuring this is to go through the enrollment. And so if I go back to devices and I go into Android specifically, and then I look at the specific enrollment option that we talked about, which is and we look at the specific enrollment option that we talked about as corporate owned dedicated devices. So, and I go set up a new profile, right? Whatever I want to call it, and then go down and look at the enrollment capabilities, there is there are two options. One is just a default standard corporate owned device. The other is corporate owned device with Azure AD shared mode, right? So this is the one that most likely, if you are going to do a lot of shared mode, that you will use, right? And so this is where I do believe we need GRM services to be able to make this happen through this. This is the only enrollment profile that has shared mode in it. And so this is where we come down to the corporate device um, profile, corporate owned dedicated device profile being required to support this, I believe, because of this particular enrollment profile, right? So, again, I'm not going to go any further with this, but I do want to show you, and trust me, this is a really exciting demo with this one device that I have configured in shared device mode. So let me get that device up and shared. And like before, I'm going to have to use my camera to actually show it to you, so stand by. Okay, so using my camera again, basically I'm showing an Android device set up in shared device mode, and this is what you will see. So this is the Microsoft Authenticator app. It is in shared device mode. You see that because this is all that the Authenticator app shows. To set it up in shared, to set it up in shared device mode, I would normally click over here. There's the three dots, and then I would go through some settings over there to get it set up in shared device mode that we document, but just enough to show you that it is actually configured here. And so good enough, right? Wanted to show that to you at least. Again, three different options for configuring Android. I just chose, manual, and then probably for the enterprise level, the right one to choose would be during enrollment, right? And so here's just some screenshots that I took of actually configuring this to get it started. So I mentioned in the upper right-hand corner, you would go to settings, and then you would go in and into your profile here and look at device registrations. Then you would register the device, and then to the next screens, basically put in your company information. Ultimately, you would get to the same screen like I just had, where you're in shared device mode, right? So that's it. That's the session. Wanted to walk through what that looked like, how to set it up on Windows, iOS, iPadOS, and Android. So we will wrap this session, and we will see you next time.